In the vast expanse of an uncharted sector, the Lenforians had been scanning for hours as their ship hummed with the soft buzz of the scanning arrays. Valley sat at her station, her eyes fixed on the holographic display in front of her, the stars flickering and warping around the edges of the screen like a slow dance of fireflies. Her mind was far from the present. Even as her fingers moved with practiced ease across the controls, her thoughts drifted to her last conversation with her elder sister back home, in the heart of the Lenforian Empire. Her sister had always been the optimist, while Valley was the cautious one, always analyzing the potential dangers of the unknown sectors of space. They now found themselves in Valley thought of her words, "You can't live in fear of what's out there." Valley shook her head, a small sigh escaping her lips. Her eyes flickered to the radar readout as an unexpected shift in the data caught her attention. A signal unlike anything she had ever encountered before appeared on the display. At first it was a whisper, a mere ripple in the sea of static, but it was growing louder, more pronounced, and clearly artificial. Valley's brow furrowed as she leaned closer. The signal was repeating a pattern, but it was disjointed like a broken code. Her fingers froze above the controls, the sudden realization hitting her like a cold wave. This wasn't a random anomaly or a background radiation flare. This was something purposeful. She tapped into the ship's system to filter the signal, but no matter what parameters she adjusted, the same thing appeared on the screen, the strange repeating signal growing stronger by the second. Valley took a slow breath, her mind racing. What was this? What could it be? Her eyes darted over the screen, her hand trembling slightly as she tried to recalibrate the signal's frequency. It was an impossible task. Nothing in her training had ever prepared her for this kind of encounter. The data didn't match anything known to the Lenforians or any of their allies in the galaxy. She sent a report to her commanding officer, but her fingers hovered over the send button, hesitation flooding her thoughts. What if this was something dangerous? What if this was a threat, and they hadn't even noticed it until now? She shook her head. The command had to be made, the report had to be sent. They couldn't let something so unknown go unexamined, even if the prospect of an unknown enemy terrified her. The signal now pulsed more rapidly with each passing second, the frequency jumping and flickering in a chaotic dance that made her heart race. A sense of dread washed over her, but her training took over, the fear settling back in the corners of her mind as she focused entirely on the task ahead. She sent the message, her fingers quickly typing out the data she had collected. She couldn't waste time on doubt or fear. The unknown was the universe's only constant, and they had to face it head-on, even if they didn't know what they were up against. But as soon as she pressed the send button, her ship's radar flared to life. The signal had transformed from a fleeting ghost into a full-on presence. It was as if the entire space around her had shifted. The object that had been sending the signal was now closing in on her position, too quickly, too purposefully. Her breath caught in her throat as the ship's systems beeped in alarm, warning her that the object was heading directly toward her. It was too close, too fast. Valley's heart skipped a beat as her radar blipped again, and the object drew closer with terrifying speed. She quickly adjusted the view, zooming in on the object's trajectory. It was coming straight for her. No evasive action, no time to dodge. The strange signal she had been tracking now became a solid form, a shape. Her mind struggled to comprehend. It was like nothing she had ever seen, a flicker in the fabric of reality itself. The design was jagged and angular, but graceful. It twisted in ways that defied logic and physics, something so foreign that it made her stomach turn. She leaned forward, her hands now shaking as they hovered over the ship's control panels, her breath shallow, her mind racing with possibilities. Her first instinct was to alert the crew of her ship, but there was no time. The object was too close. Valley's eyes darted back to the radar, and she saw the object's trajectory change ever so slightly. It was almost like it was calculating her movements, anticipating every adjustment she made, as though the ship was studying her and waiting for her next move. Her mind was reeling, trying to process the situation, but the overwhelming presence of the ship on her radar left no room for anything else. She wasn't just encountering an anomaly, she was face to face with something that knew exactly what it was doing. Her fingers hovered above the controls, but she hesitated, unable to make a decision. The object was now within visual range. Her heart thudded against her chest. As she stared out the viewport, the ship had materialized, seemingly out of nowhere, hovering in space, like a predatory bird circling its prey. It was enormous, unlike anything she had seen before. Its dark surface gleamed with a strange metallic sheen, and as it drew closer she could make out faint light patterns flashing across its hull. Valley's breath hitched as she realized that the ship wasn't just closing the distance between them, but doing so with unnatural precision, its movements calculated and deliberate. She felt a chill race down her spine. Her mind screamed at her to take action, but she was frozen by the sheer enormity of the situation. She had never felt so small, so insignificant in the face of such power. Her training had prepared her for many things, but nothing like this. With a jolt of panic, she reached out to activate the comm system and send a distress signal to her superiors back on the homeworld. But as she initiated the transmission, a strange static began to fill the cockpit, her ship's systems momentarily glitching as the unknown ship's presence seemed to disrupt her communication signals. Valley swallowed hard, her hands now gripping the controls as if to steady herself. The object was too close now, there was no turning back. Her mind reeled with questions. What was this ship? What did it want? And most importantly, who was controlling it? And then, without warning, the strange vessel emitted a high-pitched sound that reverberated through the ship's hull, the noise so loud and piercing that Valley's ears rang. Her fingers flew over the controls, desperately trying to regain control of the ship, but the object seemed to be overriding her every move. It was as if the ship was communicating with her on a level she couldn't understand. Her mind swam with the realization that this wasn't just a random encounter or a chance meeting of two ships in the vast emptiness of space. This was something. The hum of the alien ship grew louder, vibrating through the walls of Valley's cockpit. Her eyes flicked back to the viewport, searching for any sign of movement from the ship. She could feel the hairs on the back of her neck rise, the tension in the air so thick it felt like she was suffocating. The strange vessel didn't approach with the urgency of a predator. It was calculated, deliberate, as if it was waiting for her to make the first move. Valley's mind raced. What was she supposed to do? The command deck would be expecting answers, but she had none to give. There was no protocol for this. No manual that could tell her how to handle an unknown force that seemed to defy everything she knew about space and technology. She was trained to deal with anomalies, with stray signals and miscalculations. But this was something else entirely. Her fingers hovered over the controls once again, her mind grappling with the options before her. She could try to retreat, to escape, but the ship's movements were so precise, so swift, that she doubted she could outrun it. Every course change she made was met with the same eerie response, as if the alien vessel was anticipating her every move. It wasn't just chasing her, it was playing a game. The message from her superior still echoed in her mind, the directive to engage with unknown entities cautiously, to learn their patterns, their weaknesses. But how could she learn anything if she couldn't even understand the entity that was watching her every move? She realized then that this was no random encounter, it was intentional. The ship wasn't just tracking her, it was waiting for something. A burst of static crackled over the comm system, followed by a low rhythmic pulse. Valley's hands flew to the comm controls, desperately trying to adjust the frequencies, but the strange sound grew louder, more distinct. Then, through the crackling static, a voice unlike anything Valley had ever heard, slipped through. It wasn't the harsh, mechanical tone of the Lenforians, nor was it the soothing, harmonic language of the Zentarans. It was a rough, almost guttural sound, punctuated with odd pauses and fluctuating rhythms, a language that was both foreign and yet strangely familiar. A chill ran through her as the realization set in. They were trying to communicate. The ship's hull seemed to ripple as the voice continued, almost as if the very vessel itself was alive, speaking through the pulse of its engines. Valley had no idea what was being said, but she could feel the weight of the words pressing against her chest, demanding her attention. She stared at the controls, fingers trembling, uncertain whether to respond or remain silent. In her mind, the possibilities swirled. Was this a form of warning, a greeting, or was it a challenge? Before she could make a decision, a sudden shift in the ship's approach sent a jolt through her. The human ship, she knew now it was human, had closed the gap between them even more, and with a fluid, almost impossible movement, it cut across her path, blocking her retreat. She slammed her hands down on the controls, trying to pull away, but it was like the human ship was everywhere at once. It wasn't moving with the predictability of a regular ship. It moved in ways that defied all logic. There was no sense of inertia, no hesitation. The human ship was defying the natural laws of motion. Valley's eyes widened as the realization struck her. The ship wasn't just fast, it was able to manipulate space itself. The ship performed another sudden shift, turning on a dime, and coming to a complete stop directly in front of her. Valley's breath caught in her throat as she watched the human vessel hover in place, almost as if it was studying her. And in that moment, she understood. This ship wasn't here to destroy her. It was here to test her. For the first time, Valley felt truly powerless. She had always believed in the superiority of the Lenforians, in their unmatched technological prowess. But now, in the presence of this human ship, she felt like a child facing a force beyond her comprehension. The human ship's engines hummed softly, and for a brief moment, the entire galaxy seemed to hold its breath. Then the communication system crackled once more, a single message cutting through the static. "We are human. Stand down." Valley froze, the meaning of the message washing over her in a tidal wave. Stand down. The words were simple, yet they carried an undeniable weight. She was facing a species that didn't just survive the unknown. They mastered it. As the message repeated, she realized the truth. She had encountered something far greater than herself, something Valley's mind was a whirlpool of thoughts, each one crashing into the next. The human ship, so strange, so powerful, hovered before her, its presence dominating the vast emptiness of space. Her hands gripped the controls tightly, her knuckles white. The weight of the situation was crushing her, yet in the midst of the growing chaos, she couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of awe. The human ship emitted a low, resonating hum, almost as if it were alive, its engines pulsing with a quiet but insistent power. Valley's ship, though technologically advanced by any standard, suddenly felt fragile and small, like an insect beneath the foot of a giant. She quickly glanced at the readouts. Her shields were holding, but barely. Her energy reserves were draining faster than they should have, as if the very presence of the human ship was feeding on her vessel's power. Her fingers hesitated above the controls once more. Her mind screamed at her to take action. She had to do something. Anything. To regain control. But the human ship seemed to anticipate her every move. It was as if it was reading her intentions before she even made them. With every course change she made, the human ship mirrored her with terrifying precision, never giving her an opening. Then, without warning, the human ship launched forward with a burst of speed that defied all the known laws of space travel. Valley's eyes widened in disbelief. It moved faster than she could process, blurring into a streak of light as it shot past her, only to snap into a position directly in her path. She tried to veer away, but her ship's engines struggled to respond, as if some invisible force were holding her in place. The human ship didn't seem to care for the laws of physics. It didn't need to worry about inertia or momentum. It moved with a fluidity that made it appear as though the very fabric of space was bending to its will. Valley's pulse quickened, and the air in the cockpit grew thick. This was no ordinary craft. It was a machine that operated on a different level, a level far beyond anything the Lenforians had ever encountered. Her ship jerked again, the systems flickering as if they were being pulled in a different direction. She scrambled to stabilize her course, But the human ship seemed to be toying with her now. It edged closer, sending a pulse of energy toward her ship that made the entire vessel shudder. The shockwave rattled her bones, and for a brief, terrifying moment, her vision blurred. Then the voice came again. A deep, resonating voice filled the cockpit, and Valley's heart skipped a beat. The language was still alien to her, but the meaning was unmistakable. It was like the ship itself was speaking to her, not just through words, but through its very presence. It wasn't demanding anything. It wasn't threatening her. It was simply asserting itself, as though telling her, "I am here." Valley's hands trembled as she gripped the console. She had no choice but to comply. The human ship had proven its strength. It was inescapable. But there was something more, something that she couldn't quite grasp. Beneath the arrogance of its power, there was a quiet, terrifying confidence. The human ship did not need to prove itself. It already knew it was unstoppable. The realization hit Valley like a hammer. This wasn't a display of aggression. This wasn't a show of force. It was a demonstration of something far more profound. A quiet assertion that the humans were masters of their fate, masters of space itself. Valley's breath caught in her throat as the realization washed over her. The human ship had been testing her, pushing her to her limits to see if she would break. It had not tried to destroy her. It had only tried to understand her, to gauge her strength. The ship wasn't just interested in her vessel. It was interested in her, in the Lenthorians, in everything they stood for. She realized then that this wasn't just a chance encounter. This was first contact. And it was a test that she had no way of preparing for. The human ship hummed again, its engines vibrating with energy. It hovered before her like a looming monolith, patient yet unyielding. The message came again, clearer this time. "We are human. Stand down." For a brief, paralyzing moment, Valley considered what those words truly meant. She could feel the power of the human ship pressing against her, and she realized that the only thing left for her to do was to yield. Her fingers slowly drifted. Valley's breath was shallow, each inhale feeling like a weight pressing down on her chest. The human ship hovered before her like an immovable force, its engines pulsing with a low hum that reverberated through her vessel. She had been trained to handle countless scenarios, but nothing in her training could have prepared her for this. The calmness with which the human ship confronted her, unfazed, confident, almost indifferent, shook her to her core. Her mind was racing, trying to process the impossibility of the situation. She was a member of the Lenthorian Navigational Fleet, one of the most advanced and powerful civilizations in the galaxy, yet in the face of this human ship, she felt like nothing more than a child playing in the shadow of a titan. It wasn't just their technology. It was their will, their unfaltering certainty that the universe was theirs for the taking. The human ship didn't move, didn't speak again, only continued to hover there, a monolithic presence in the vast emptiness of space. Valley's ship was locked in place, her engines sputtering in resistance, but yielding to the pressure exerted by the human vessel. Her vessel's once pristine systems, once a symbol of Lenthorian ingenuity, felt fragile and outdated in comparison. 1,000 questions swirled in her mind, but one loomed larger than the others. Why? Why had the humans come here? Why had they chosen her, her ship, her crew? Were they simply testing her, or was there more at play here, something deeper? Her thoughts swirled in the vacuum of space, and yet, for all the questions, she still had no answers. In a moment of weakness, she glanced down at the blinking readouts on her console. Her communication systems were still offline, the systems glitching intermittently in the wake of the human ship's presence. Her pulse quickened. If she couldn't establish contact, then how could she report back to the command fleet? She had no way of getting help, no way of escaping. And yet there was something in the back of her mind, a whisper, a gut feeling. The human ship hadn't attacked her. It hadn't fired a single weapon, hadn't attempted to board or disable her vessel. It was watching her, studying her. She sat frozen, her hands hovering over the controls, fighting against the overwhelming urge to flee. But there was nowhere to go. And if the humans wanted her dead, they could have done so already. They had power, yes, but also patience. Patience that stretched the boundaries of her understanding. Suddenly, the voice came again, this time louder and clearer, filling the cabin like the hum of the engines, resonating through her very bones. The voice was rough, like the grinding of stone, yet there was something unmistakable about it, a clarity that spoke directly to her soul. "We are human. Stand down." The words repeated, each time carrying more weight, more finality. Valley shuddered. The voice wasn't harsh, but there was an unshakable resolve behind it. The humans were not demanding. No, they were commanding her to comply. And as she sat there, her vessel caught in their gravity, she knew that resistance was futile. In that moment, Valley's mind shifted. All the stories she had heard growing up about the galactic powers, about the superiority of the Lenthorians, about the unbreakable laws of space, all of it crumbled. She had been taught to fear the unknown, to respect the great unknowns of the galaxy, but never had she been told to submit to them. And yet here she was, faced with a force so alien, so terrifying, that it left her with no choice. To stand down, she thought. To submit, to let go of the fight. It was a foreign concept, one that seemed to fly in the face of everything she had been trained to believe. But as the human ship's message resonated in her mind, she understood. This wasn't about destruction or conquest. This was about power. The kind of power that doesn't need to fight, the kind that commands the universe to bend to its will. The human ship's engines pulsed again, sending a wave of energy through her own ship, and Valley felt it, the subtle, undeniable shift in the air, the slow hum of a power far beyond her own. She could no longer deny it. The humans were not here to negotiate. They were here to instruct. With a sinking feeling in her chest, Valley took a deep breath, her fingers moving toward the control panel. She didn't want to do this, didn't want to give in to the crushing weight of the human ship's will. But as she pressed a few buttons, signaling her compliance, a strange calm washed over her. The battle wasn't over. Not yet. But she had lost. And for the first time in her life. The moment Valley confirmed her compliance, a sudden silence fell over the cockpit. The low hum of the human ship's engines was the only sound, echoing in the vast emptiness of space. Her hands were still frozen on the controls, but her mind was racing. She had submitted, yes, but what did that mean for her now? For her crew? For the Lenthorians? A strange stillness lingered in the air, as if the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Valley's heart pounded in her chest, each beat heavy with uncertainty. She had never imagined this. She had never imagined standing before something so incomprehensibly powerful that it could reduce her to nothing. But as she stared at the console, her thoughts racing, a part of her began to accept the reality of the situation. There was no going back. The human ship had made its presence known, and in that presence was a dominance that couldn't be ignored. She was standing in the face of a force that had no need to prove itself, because it simply was. Suddenly, the silence was broken again. The communication system flickered to life, and a voice filled the cockpit. This time, the tone was different. It was calm, deliberate, and yet somehow reassuring. A stark contrast to the earlier demand. "You have made the right decision," the voice said, its words almost gentle, like a teacher speaking to an unruly student. "You will find that resistance to us is futile, but cooperation will open doors to a future unlike any you've ever known." Valley's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know how to respond. How could she? She had no frame of reference for this kind of interaction, no way of understanding what was happening to her. She wasn't even sure she was hearing the words correctly. But there it was, the sense that the humans weren't here to destroy or conquer. No, they were offering something. something she couldn't yet grasp but knew was profound, something far more valuable than any war or victory. Her hands fell to her sides, her grip loosening on the controls. The ship, the crew, everything seemed so far away now. What had been a mission of exploration, a routine scan in an uncharted part of space, had turned into something monumental. "You do not understand yet," the voice continued, "but you will. We do not wish to fight with you. We wish to guide you." Valley's head swam with confusion. Guide her? Guide the Lenforians? The very same Lenforians who had once been the unquestioned leaders of the galaxy. It was absurd. And yet, as she processed the voice's words, something shifted inside her. There was truth in the calmness of their tone, a depth that she couldn't ignore. A part of her, despite the years of indoctrination and pride that had defined her existence, was beginning to understand. The human ship slowly, almost ceremoniously, began to pull away from her own. It moved with precision, a careful retreat. Valley watched, her mind still reeling. She thought for a moment that the human vessel would disappear into the dark expanse of space. But it didn't. Instead, it stopped, just far enough to allow for a direct line of communication. The message continued. "You will join us, not as a conquered species, but as equals. Your world, your people, there is a place for you in this future we offer. A future without the need for war or struggle. One built on knowledge and understanding." Valley's hands shook as she absorbed the words. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The Lenforians had built an empire on strength, on domination. They had expanded and taken what they believed was rightfully theirs. They had never known a life where power wasn't the ultimate goal. And yet here, before her, was an offer, a proposition that spoke of cooperation, of peace. It was beyond anything she had ever known, beyond anything she had ever been trained to understand. "Do not make the mistake of thinking us weak," the voice said, now taking on a more resolute tone. "You will be given the chance to choose. But know this, time waits for no one. You either rise to this opportunity or you remain in the past." The comm channel clicked off, leaving Valley in a profound silence. The human ship hung in space, an enigma. Its presence was like a shadow, vast and unwavering. It was clear now that they weren't just looking for compliance. They were offering an entirely new path. Her fingers hovered over the comm system once more, the weight of her choice pressing on her. There was no going back. She had to decide. Would she lead the Lenforians into this new era? Valley's fingers hovered over the comm panel, her heart beating in her chest like a drum. The weight of the decision before her was suffocating. The humans had extended an olive branch, an offer that seemed too good to be true. They didn't want to conquer the Lenforians. They didn't want to destroy them. They wanted cooperation, understanding, a partnership that would transcend everything she had ever known. It sounded like a dream she wasn't sure she was ready to embrace. Her mind raced, a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. The Lenforians had always been the apex of civilization in the galaxy. They had built their empire on strength, technology, and the iron grip of control. And now, after centuries of dominance, here she was, confronted by a species so far beyond her comprehension that all she could do was submit. The offer was alluring, yes. The thought of peace, of moving beyond the endless cycles of war and conflict, was a temptation. But how could she accept this? How could she turn her back on everything she had ever been taught, everything she had ever known? The human ship, floating silently just beyond her own, seemed to watch her with an unblinking gaze, waiting for a response. The stillness in the cockpit was suffocating. Her crew, her ship, they were all waiting for her to make the call. She could feel their eyes on her, even though she couldn't see them. They were as lost in this moment as she was. With a deep, shuddering breath, Valley pressed a button on the console, opening a direct channel to the human vessel. Her hand shook, but she steadied herself, her voice coming out steadier than she felt. "Human vessel, She began, her tone surprisingly firm. We have heard your offer, and while it is difficult to accept, I cannot deny its truth. Your power, your knowledge, it is unlike anything we have encountered." She paused, taking another breath, gathering her thoughts. The weight of history pressed on her shoulders. The Lenthorians had never submitted. They had never bent to another species, never acknowledged a force stronger than their own. But here she was, doing just that. "You say you wish to guide us," she continued, her voice quieter now. "But understand this. We are a people who have known only conquest. We are built on a foundation of domination. To accept your offer would require us to rethink everything, to change everything." The silence stretched on. Her words felt hollow in her own ears. She had no idea if the humans were even listening. If they were, what did they think of her hesitation, her uncertainty? Finally, the voice came again, calm and unwavering, as though it had been waiting for her to say exactly this. "We understand," the voice replied, the words resonating with a depth of knowing. "It is difficult to shed the past, but the future is shaped by those willing to change, willing to evolve. You are not alone in this. We will stand with you, but only if you choose to stand with us." Valley's fingers tightened around the edge of the console, her mind now a swirl of thoughts. This wasn't a simple decision. It wasn't just about her. It was about her people, her planet, her civilization. To embrace the humans' offer was to embrace the unknown. To turn away was to cling to a dying way of life. There was something in the voice of the humans, something that called to her. It wasn't just their technology, their power. It was the way they spoke, the quiet certainty that they had seen the future and were inviting her to join them. It wasn't a matter of dominance. It was a matter of choice, and that, more than anything, struck her to her core. She glanced once more at the view of the human ship, so serene in its dominance, so unthreatened by her vessel. It was like watching the tide roll in, unstoppable. To conquer, it was here to guide. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized that perhaps that was the greatest power of all. Valley swallowed hard, her throat dry. She had one chance to change the course of history, not just for herself, but for all of her people. Her voice came again, this time with more resolve. I accept," she said, the words finally spilling from her lips. "We will stand with you." The moment the words left her mouth, she felt the change. The oppressive weight that had settled over her lifted, replaced by something lighter, something full of potential. For the first time, she felt the possibility of something greater than victory, something more profound than power. She felt the spark of hope. The human voice spoke once more, this time softer, warmer. "Good. Together, we will build a future beyond anything you have imagined." And in that moment, Valley realized that the path ahead wasn't just about submission. It was about evolution. It was about understanding that true strength came from unity, not division. Her choice was made. The Lenthorians would rise, not as conquerors, but as partners. The future had arrived, and it was far greater than she had ever imagined. As Valley spoke those final words, the reality of her decision began to settle in. The weight of the moment, of what she had just committed herself and her people to, was enormous. Her heart was still racing, but now it beat with a new sense of purpose. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, she felt as if she was standing at the edge of something greater than herself, something bigger than the Lenthorians, or even the humans. She was standing on the precipice of an entirely new era. For the first time, she truly understood the depth of the humans' offer. They weren't offering just technology or power. They weren't offering dominance or control. They were offering a new way of thinking, a new approach to existence, a chance to evolve, not just physically, but intellectually, culturally, and spiritually. The idea of peace, true peace, was something the Lenthorians had never known. The cycle of conquest, of endless war, had been all-consuming. The thought that there was another way, An entirely new paradigm was both terrifying and liberating. The human ship responded immediately, as though it had been waiting for her to speak. A soft, almost musical hum reverberated through the communication system, a signal of acknowledgement. The voice returned, but now it was different, softer, warmer, as though they too had been anticipating this moment. "Your decision will change everything, Valley," the voice said. "Not just for your people, but for all of us. We are not here to impose our will. We are here to share it. Together, we can shake the galaxy in a way that has never been done before." Valley sat back in her seat, her mind still reeling from the enormity of the change. She could feel the pulse of energy from the human ship, distant but undeniable. It was almost as if the ship itself was alive, aware of her decision and the monumental shift that had just occurred. And in that moment, she felt a deep connection, not just to the humans, but to the very universe around her. There was so much more than what she had ever understood, so much more than what her species had ever believed possible. The hum of the ship faded, and a new series of coordinates flashed on her console. A soft beep sounded, signaling that the destination had been set. Valley blinked, taking in the information. She knew this place. It was uncharted territory, a sector of space that had been overlooked by the Lenthorians. It had once been considered insignificant, not worth exploring. But the humans had other plans. They had seen something in it. The human ship's presence loomed on the edge of her sensors, a constant reminder that the future was not just a distant possibility. It was already here. The path they were about to walk would be one of discovery, growth, and most importantly, change. The Lenthorians would no longer be an isolated empire. They would no longer be confined to their own ways of thinking. With the humans at their side, they would reach new frontiers, new worlds, and new ideas. As the ship slowly began its journey toward the new coordinates, Valley's mind raced. She had so many questions about the humans, about their culture, about their technology. She had so much to learn. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid. The uncertainty that had once paralyzed her now felt like a call to adventure, a challenge that she could rise to meet. She glanced down at the control panel, her fingers lightly grazing the smooth surface. Her crew was still watching her, waiting for the next step. She could feel their eyes on her, but this time, there was no fear. There was only anticipation. They were ready to move forward. "Prepare for jump," she said, her voice firm and steady. "We're going to make history." As the ship powered up, the stars outside the window blurred, streaking into long lines of light. The vastness of space stretched before them, infinite and full of possibility. For the first time, Valley felt as if she was no longer alone in the galaxy. The Lenthorians had never had allies, never had anyone to stand beside them. But now they had the humans. And together, they would chart a new course for the future. A future where strength was not measured by conquest, but by unity. As the ship entered the jump, Valley allowed herself one final glance at the human vessel. The shape of it was fading into the distance, but its presence would remain with her, a constant reminder of the decision she had made. And in that moment, as she looked ahead to the unknown, she realized that the true power of the humans lay not in their technology or their strength, but in their vision. A vision that would